Hey, it's Silver, and this is WitchSpring R. So this one is really fascinating to me because it just kind of came out of nowhere, and it turns out it's a really, really good JRPG that's like very competent and has some really fun characters and a pretty cool story. And like I said, it just kind of came out of nowhere. So some of you might recognize the WitchSpring name because this is not the first one. This is actually more like the fifth one-ish. But the games are pretty much exclusively mobile games, and up until now, I believe, at least from what I know, WitchSpring 4 was the latest release. And this is kind of a remake of the first game, but also kind of not. I would say it's more like it's based off of the first game, but heavily expanded from there. It's like over twice the size of the first game, and has a lot of content and stuff that game didn't have. So it's more like it's using it as like a base to be its own thing. And if you're wondering, oh, it's a mobile franchise, does that mean it's going to be like really badly monetized and full of gacha mechanics and stuff? Well, actually, no. The WitchSpring games were all premium mobile games, meaning they cost money, they weren't free. And they didn't have any of the like wait timery, gacha-y stuff that a lot of mobile games are known for. And this game, even more so than that, doesn't have any of those kind of mechanics because it is, of course, a premium RPG. It is not just a mobile game that was put on Steam, it was actually made for PC. So the basic idea is you're an adorable little witch and you're trying to figure out what is actually going on in the world because humans keep invading your forest, and there's some mysterious stuff happening with this figure that everyone's calling the Pope, and some other weird stuff is going on, and you're just sort of trying to figure out what's happening, and then you find this adorable bird thing, more about him later. And the whole game takes place in this world where there are these things that people call witches, and basically, from what I understand of the story, the idea is that these gods used to exist, but then humans found the source of their power, took it, and killed most of the gods. But the gods sort of became demonized, literally, like they actually called them demons, and then they gave birth to witches as a result, and now humanity hates witches because they see them as like a symbol of the gods that were deposed. And the world is absolutely ruthless against the witches because of the humanity's fear of them, so you have figures like these warriors, which are like the Pope's army, who will actually go and hunt down witches while they're children and kill them so that they can't grow up and become more powerful. So enter you, a small witch who is trying to be more powerful, and obviously this causes some problems within the world, and you've got to figure out how to solve all these issues, while also exposing the Pope's corruption and all that usual stuff. So it is a relatively, it's a story you've probably heard before in some capacity, but it is actually told pretty well, and the focus here isn't really on the big picture story, but rather it's on the characters themselves, the smaller stories of each individual character and all their development. So you meet this bird, and this bird is amazing. His name is Joe, although that's not his real name exactly, but I won't spoil how all that works. And I want a plushie of this bird thing. It's really cute, and he's sort of an idiot, but also like a really good audience surrogate kind of character who is actually very smart and knows a lot about the world and helps kind of explain things to everyone. So he's that character, but he's really funny, and he's super cute, and like I said, I really want a plush of him. I think he's very funny looking, and he makes a good, like, comic relief character at first, but he develops into more than that as the story goes on. This is a very combat-focused JRPG. You're going to be doing battles a lot, although this game is not about grinding, but I'll explain that in a minute. So the combat has a lot of different mechanics to it. You've got a staff at first, where you just have a basic attack and some spells to cast. And the spell system is pretty cool because it involves crafting these circles, and then you can inscribe these circles onto a slab and then use them as spells. So you might get like a 4-orb flame circle or a 5-orb flame circle, and they just sort of go up in power like that. And each circle has its own version of that elemental spell attached to it. So like casting the 3-orb flame circle gives you like a geyser of flame underneath an enemy's feet that damages one enemy, and then casting the 4-orb flame circle actually creates 4 fireballs in the air that you can individually target, all 4 on one enemy or spread across 4 enemies or whatever you want to do with them. Also, whenever you cast a spell, based on the damage it does, you get a sort of mana charge on your staff for 1 turn, and this charge empowers your physical attacks with some of it. So if you get like a 600 mana charge on your staff, that's 600 extra damage that it can pour into your attacks in addition to whatever physical damage you do just by whacking things with them. So when you give people the stick bonk, it actually infuses your stick bonks with your mana in order to make them more powerful. So you're encouraged to switch back and forth between physical attacks and spells rather than focusing on just one of them because they kind of empower each other. Eventually, you'll also find other weapons you can equip. You can get things like swords, and the swords obviously don't have much in the way of magical power. They don't enhance your spells very much, if at all, but they do enhance your physical attack power a lot, and if you want to focus more on being a physical attacker, then the swords are the way to go. They also get some sword arts that can empower some of your attacks, and you can get things like a stun strike, a double strike, a triple strike, an overpowering strike, which pours some of your health into the hit to make it super strong, and some other things like that. So there's actually quite a bit of variety in terms of the physical attacks, which you might not expect for a game about magic, but yeah, there's a lot in terms of like physical damage stuff you can actually play with. Eventually, you'll also find some other books, some spell books that allow you to craft other elements of spells. So you'll start with just fire, but you can eventually get lightning, for instance, which is a very powerful type of magic that does a ton of damage, but is very expensive to cast. So you got to be a bit careful about using it too much. And you can eventually, much later, get some ice stuff as well that works a bit differently. And each spell book has its own list of like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different magic circles that it can make with varying amounts of more increasingly rare materials and stuff that you can find to make better and better magic. And you can also find these secondary magic circles that you can equip alongside a primary one that will enhance them in some way. They can decrease the cost of the spell they're attached to, or they can increase its cost but increase its power, or you can use a combination of the two, or whatever you want to do to sort of fine-tune your spells. You can also find lots of other books around the place because the crafting of spells isn't the only kind of crafting you do. You also have some other crafting recipes that you'll find in other books, like a book about making different kinds of bombs, or a book about making different kinds of sort of like herbal remedies for healing and mana regen and stuff like that. And you'll find a lot of these to just give you more things to craft. There's kind of like an alchemy system going on where you can get all sorts of different materials from gathering them in the world or getting them from monster drops and things like that, and then you can combine these in your cauldron back at home to make various things. And these are really important because you will need a lot of like healing and restorative items throughout the game. The combat is actually relatively challenging at times. The game looks very cute, but it is not like super casual and easy. It actually does have some challenge to it. So you will need lots of consumables and things while you're exploring around to help you out. There are also several other mechanics that are layered onto the combat. So you've got things like these special skills you can get as you gain new weapons or evolve the weapons you have. You can actually evolve them by feeding them different, it actually calls it feeding them different materials, and once they're fed a certain number of materials, you can use other rarer mats to evolve them, and you can evolve them down different paths, like being entirely physical based or entirely magical based and what have you, and they will get different special skills when you do this that you can use in combat, and they have their own menu in the combat screen. You can also get various blessings that you'll find as you go through the story. You'll get blessings from various gods at their springs in the bottom of temples, which are like long dungeon kind of areas, and these blessings can be all sorts of things, but they're always really powerful. It also allows you to choose one stat to increase from all of your stats whenever you get a blessing for the first time, but it will also give you some sort of active ability. It could be a big arrow that does a ton of damage to one enemy and doesn't take a turn to use, or it could be something that actually makes you invincible for a couple of turns and makes enemies take damage when they try to hit you, and some other things like that. There's even one that revives you if you fall down, but only once per battle. However, all of these sort of extra layered mechanics, they're all cooldown based or timing based. So all of these skills I mentioned, most of them won't be available when you first start a battle, but after say 2 or 3 or 4 turns, then they'll come up and actually become available. One takes even longer than that. It takes like 5 or 6 turns. And then they'll go back on cooldown again once you use them. There's also this crit system, which is kind of interesting. So you have a normal crit chance that just, sometimes your attacks will do critical damage, but also every 4 turns in battle, this crit gauge will fill, and it will guarantee that whatever you use during that turn is a crit. So what all this means is you're quite powerful in this game, and you feel powerful, and you feel like you're growing in power throughout the game because of all the extra mechanics you get, the increase in stats and stuff. You feel all of it, and you feel like you're getting noticeably stronger. But enemies also get stronger very quickly as well, and this means that enemies often do very high damage per turn, so you've got to be careful about like powering them down quickly. Combat often turns into like a damage race where you can do tons of damage, but so can the enemy, so you've got to try to prioritize the enemies that are most threatening and power them down first and things like that. There's also a pet system in the game, which is pretty cool. You can get various pets. You get a mind control spell that actually does damage, and the way it works is once an enemy's down below like 30% HP, they'll get this magic circle around them that shows they can be mind controlled, and if you can then cast the spell on them and have it deal enough damage to get the rest of their health out of the way, then it'll mind control them and you'll gain them as a pet. Most things can't be mind controlled in this game. Only specific enemies around the map can. Enemies do respawn, and the game helpfully shows you the respawn timer for everything in the world, by the way. Every time you gather something, or every time you beat a certain group of enemies, a respawn timer pops up in a big circle that shows you how long until it comes back, which is really appreciated. All pets have stats just like you do, and they have a basic attack thing that they will do on their turn, but if you feed them, you can actually increase their affinity towards you, and once you max it out, they also gain some extra skills they can use in battle, usually some sort of like ultimate kind of attack that is much more powerful that they only do every certain number of turns. And pets in this game are very powerful. They are absolutely worth getting whenever you can. You'll also get some simply by going through the story. There are several very good pets that you'll get, some of which aren't really exactly even pets necessarily because they're people, that you'll get as allies just from going through the story, and you can summon to help you whenever you need, although of course summoning a pet does cost mana to do. The way this game handles your stats and you getting more powerful is really interesting. It's actually something that I like to see done more in games because I think it has a lot of potential. So this game doesn't have levels exactly. You don't gain experience and then gain levels from doing a lot of battles. Instead, you have a couple of different ways of getting stronger. For one, you have a battle ranking, and this is the closest thing to traditional experience. Basically, whenever you beat something, you get some XP in this battle ranking gauge, and whenever the gauge fills up, all of your stats go up by a good amount, and you also unlock some extra stuff like more accessory slots and things like that. But these are big things that only happen a few times in the game. This isn't like, you know, your traditional leveling system where you're going to be like level 60 by the end or whatever. This only happens 5 times. Level 5 is the max of the battle rank. So it takes a lot of killed enemies to actually level up this ranking, but the stat increase that you get is very large each time. And despite the amount of time it takes to do this, the game successfully avoids making it a grind through one simple thing. You can only get the battle experience the first time you beat a group of enemies. So you can't grind it. You can't just beat the same enemies over and over to raise it as much as you want. Every group of enemies that spawned in the field only gives you XP once. So if you want to keep increasing your battle rank, you're going to have to explore around, continue the story, and find more new areas full of new enemies. So I think that's actually a really smart way to do it, to avoid the whole thing feeling grindy since you literally can't. But that's only an occasional large increase in power. The actual way that you're going to get stronger for the most part is training. So you have this training gauge in the top left of the screen that goes from 0 to 5. And whenever you're in your home, your safe area, you can choose to do stuff like craft and mess with your magic circles and all that stuff, but you can also train. And you can train as many times as the open slots you have from 0 to 5. And there are like 10 different training regimens you can do, and each one improves different stats a different amount. You know, some are all about physical strength, some are about giving you more MP, some are all about defense or speed or HP. There are a bunch of different ones, and you can choose as many as you have open slots for, so you can train multiple different things at once. And once the training starts, it'll actually pick a minigame, and every single training has its own minigame. You can choose to auto-train, which means it will automatically succeed and you don't have to play a minigame, so if you don't want to do them, you don't have to. But if you choose to play the minigame, it will give you the chance to perfect that minigame, and if you perfect it, you'll get a 30% increase in the stats you gain from training. So you might have 4 open slots and do 2 pure magic training, 1 MP, and 1 speed, and then it'll choose one of those 3 different minigames, one for each of the 3 different kinds of training you chose, and then you'll do that one, and you don't have to do all of them, it'll just pick one. And once you complete it, it will show you the results of all of the training slots you did, and your stats will increase by whatever amount you trained for. Your training slots will then go down to 0 if you use them all up, and they will slowly refill as you just do stuff. As you go through the story, as you complete battles, as you gather stuff, all of this sort of takes time, and as time continues, your training slots will go back up. But this is not like a real-time mobile game wait timer kind of thing. This doesn't go back up in real time. You don't just sit there for 5 minutes and wait for it to fill. It fills up by you actually exploring and doing things. And then once the gauge fills up, one of your slots will open back up again, and you can go back and train, or you can just wait for several slots to open up at once, which is usually a good idea because that perfect bonus is a 30% increase. So the more of your stats you increase at once, the better that 30% is. So you're encouraged to wait for like 4 or 5 slots to open up and then do like bulk training all at once. This is basically the replacement for leveling up. This is how you're going to increment your stats several times over the course of the game. Story-wise, the game is unexpectedly really quite good, like story and character-wise. The story is, like I mentioned earlier, a little bit cliched, you know, like fight the evil pope is not a strange story for a JRPG. That's actually pretty common, but the way that it goes about making its characters matter is really cool, and there's actually some really good character moments in this game. There's some really sad stuff, like unexpectedly so, because the game is often quite funny outside of that, and then suddenly it gets really sad out of nowhere. And like, there's some also really dark stuff. I mean, I mentioned earlier that they were hunting down witches as children deliberately and killing them to prevent them from growing up and getting more powerful. So the game does actually have some really dark elements to it as well that I think combined together to make a really interesting journey. The characters are quite well written in this game and are fun to watch grow. There's actually a good amount of character development for the main character, who actually physically changes form halfway through the game to represent them growing up. And you also have the other characters that seem a little bit one-dimensional at first, but that's clearly supposed to happen. You're supposed to think of them that way. And then you see them again, and you see them a little bit more, and then you discover more of their backstory, and then you discover their motivations, and then they become actual three-dimensional characters, and you realize that your assumptions were probably wrong about who these characters actually were, and I like that sort of thing. You start to learn a lot more about the various warrior characters and that they're not necessarily your enemies. You find some other witches and some other not exactly witches, but not quite not either, and you learn a lot more about the history of what the witches actually are, and this sort of ancient power struggle where these gods are sort of dying out and their blessings are sought after, but also very, very rare, and everyone is sort of trying to preserve them. This is also not a small game, I should mention. This is probably going to take you around like the 25 to 30 hour mark in order to actually beat. There's a lot here. It's a pretty significantly sized JRPG, and like I said, it kind of came out of nowhere for me because I had heard of the WitchSpring games. I know of them. I've played a little bit of a couple of them, but I don't really know a whole lot about the history of the franchise or anything. So playing this, I didn't know exactly what to expect, and what I got was a really competently made JRPG that has a lot to it. And some of the character moments have been really memorable for me, and I've actually enjoyed exploring this world and learning more about the characters. They're well written enough for me to definitely care about, and the overall story is, although JRPG standard in some aspects, is also presented in such a way that makes for an interesting world, and that's enough for me to get attached to the characters and want to learn more about them. If you're looking for a solid JRPG to play, then this is definitely up there, and I think you'll probably enjoy the characters a lot if you actually get into the world. There's quite a bit here to enjoy, so yeah, this is definitely one that I would recommend. I think it's definitely going to be one of those surprised kind of sleeper hits in the JRPG scene, one of those indie JRPGs that garners a lot of love for doing things a little bit differently and having a lot of passion put into it. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for this game if you wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.